The serving tray were already falling from Ifeoma's hands when she understood that the 6 men counting drug money in the restricted basement had just decided whether she would live or die. The voices stopped at 11:34 p.m., just as Ifeoma Johnson's fingers closed around the wine cellar key. She knew these basement corridors by heart, had walked them nearly every night for 18 months, ever since she'd started closing shifts at the Chandelier Club. The restricted hallway stretched ahead of her, all exposed pipes and fluorescent flicker, a vein of Los Angeles wealth that guests were never meant to see. But you couldn't unhear cold, clipped Korean cutting through concrete walls. Ifeoma froze mid-stride, her regulation non-slip shoes silent against polished cement. She pulled the key away from the lock, the metal still warm from her palm. Silence now. Just the whisper of ventilation ducts and the muffled bass from the party 3 floors above. Maybe she'd misheard. Maybe her exhausted mind was conjuring threats after 6 consecutive double shifts and only 4 hours of sleep between them. She turned back toward the service elevator, walking faster now. She couldn't afford complications. Before Ifeoma takes another step toward that door, if you want to see whether she survives what's waiting in that basement, hit that subscribe button right now, because in exactly 48 seconds, she's going to make a choice that the Korean Mafia will never let her take back. And trust me, you do not want to miss what Jang Kim does when their eyes meet. Like this video if you think she should run. Comment, "Open it" if you think she should investigate. Let's see what happens next. Mr. Delacroix had already called her to his office twice this month. Once for hesitating when a tech executive grabbed her waist during champagne service. Once for making eye contact with a Saudi prince's mistress when protocol demanded she stay invisible. One more incident and she'd be blacklisted from every upscale venue in LA. And rent was due in 3 days. The thought made her chest tighten. $610 in her account after this month's wire to Lagos. Rent was $1,850. That left nothing for her brother's tuition payment, already 2 weeks overdue. The community college bursar's office had stopped accepting her calls. The voices came again, sharper this time, closer, or maybe just unmistakable. The sound came first, sharp, metallic, wrong. It cut through the low murmur of voices like a blade through silk. For half a second, time seemed to pause, as if the basement itself had taken a breath. The tray slipped from Ifeoma's fingers. It hit the concrete floor with a violent crash. Crystal shattered. Dark liquid splashed across polished shoes. The echo bounced off the walls and died slowly, leaving behind a silence so heavy it pressed against her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to move, to apologize, to kneel, to disappear. She did none of those things. She stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, breath trapped in her throat, eyes locked on the man at the center of the room. Jang Kim did not flinch. Money lay spread across the long table in neat stacks, as if counted by someone who respected order more than life. His hands hovered above the bills for a moment, then continued their calm rhythm, fingertips smoothing the edges, aligning corners. Only when the last note was placed perfectly did he lift his gaze. His face showed no surprise, no anger, no rush, just interest. Around him, his men reacted instantly. Chairs scraped back, jackets shifted, hands moved beneath suit coats. The air changed, thickening with intent. Ifeoma felt it before she understood it. The quiet danger of people who had done this many times before. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words barely forming. Her knees trembled. She thought of her mother's voice telling her to keep her head down, to work hard, to survive quietly. She thought of rent due in 3 days, of double shifts, of the way exhaustion had crept into her bones and stayed there. Jang Kim finally spoke, his voice low, smooth, unhurried. "Secure her." That was all. 2 men moved at once. Ifeoma turned and ran. She made it 3 steps before a hand caught her arm. Another closed around her waist. The stairs blurred as she kicked and screamed, her shoes slipping on the wet floor. Her shoulder slammed into the wall. Pain shot down her spine, sharp and bright. "Please!" she cried. "I didn't see anything, I swear!" Her words were cut off as she was dragged back across the basement, her palms scraping against concrete, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She was forced to her knees in front of the table. Jang Kim stood now. Up close, he was taller than she expected. Lean, immaculate. His suit looked untouched by the chaos, as if the world bent around him rather than brushing against him. He circled her slowly, shoes clicking softly with each step. Ifeoma couldn't stop shaking. He stopped in front of her and looked down. Not at her face at first, at her uniform, the faint stain near the hem, the name tag pinned crookedly to her chest. Ifeoma. His eyes lifted then, meeting hers. They were colder than she imagined. Not cruel, not wild, calculating, like a man inspecting something that had landed unexpectedly on his desk. "How old are you?" he asked. Her mouth opened, closed. 26, she managed. "Too old to be careless," he said, not unkindly. She swallowed. "I was sent down here for the wine. I didn't know." "I know," he replied. That startled her more than anything else. He crouched slightly, just enough to be level with her. Up close, she noticed the faint lines near his eyes, not from age, but from focus. A man who spent his life watching people lie. "You look tired," he said. The words landed harder than the threat hanging in the air. Her eyes burned. She hated that he noticed, hated that her weakness had become visible. "I work a lot," she said quietly. One corner of his mouth lifted, almost a smile. Almost. "Everyone works," he replied. "Few survive their work." He reached out and tapped her name tag once, gently, as if testing whether it was real. "Ifeoma," he repeated. "You're far from home." She nodded without thinking. The men holding her tightened their grip, waiting. Jang Kim straightened and glanced at them. "Let her breathe." They hesitated, then loosened their hold. Ifeoma sucked in air greedily, her lungs aching. He turned his back to her and walked a few steps away, hands clasped behind him, gaze settling on the stacks of money again. "You understand what you saw," he said. Her heart lurched. "I didn't see faces. I didn't hear anything. I can forget." "I will forget." He looked over his shoulder. "You won't." The certainty in his voice stripped her of hope. "I should kill you," he continued calmly. "That would be simple, clean." Her vision blurred. But simple is not always useful. He faced her fully now. "You noticed the exit quickly," he said. "You ran without tripping. You didn't beg until you were caught." She didn't know what to say. Her survival instincts had acted before her fear could stop them. "You're observant," he added, "and desperate people are willing to learn." The basement seemed to tilt. One of the men beside her frowned. "Boss." Jang Kim raised a hand. Silence returned instantly. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell faint cologne beneath the metallic scent of money and concrete. He studied her face again, slower this time. The dark circles beneath her eyes, the tension in her jaw, the way she held herself, proud even on her knees. Then he asked, softly, as if the question were no more dangerous than a greeting, "Do you want to live?" The words hung between them, not a threat, an offer. Ifeoma's pulse roared in her ears. She knew instinctively that this was not mercy. It was a door opening into something darker than death, something that would never let her return to who she had been an hour ago. But she also knew something else. She wanted to live. "Yes," she whispered. Jong Kim nodded once, as if her answer confirmed something he had already decided. Good, he said. Then listen carefully. Everything you were before stays here. He gestured toward the shattered glass, the spilled wine, the broken moment on the floor. If you leave this room, he continued, you leave it as someone new, someone useful. He turned to his men. Clean this up, he said, and bring her upstairs. Ifioma was pulled to her feet. Her legs nearly gave out, but she stayed standing. As she was led away, she glanced back once. Jong Kim had already returned to the table, fingers moving across the money with quiet precision, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Behind her, the door closed, and just like that, there was no going back. The room felt smaller once Jang Kim finished speaking, as if the walls had leaned in to listen. The men behind him did not move. Not a chair scraped the floor. Not a breath sounded too loud. Only the low hum of electricity filled the space, steady and patient, like time itself waiting for her to make the wrong choice. Eyes and ears, Zhang said again, folding the last stack of cash with careful fingers. His voice was calm, almost polite, which somehow made it worse. Or the river. Ifioma tried to speak. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She tasted metal, sharp and dry. Her hands trembled at her sides, and she hated that they noticed. She hated that she could not stop it. You work at the Chandelier Club, Zhang continued, as if explaining a simple job posting. You serve drinks. You clean up after people who tip badly and look through you. That puts you close to conversations people think no one hears. He looked at her fully now. His eyes were dark and focused, not cruel, not angry, just certain. You already listen. I am asking you to report. One of the men slid a thin folder across the table. It stopped inches from the edge, placed with intention. Zhang nodded toward it. Inside, he said, is your life. Not the parts you show strangers, the real ones. Her fingers hovered before touching the folder. She knew she should not open it. She knew it would change something permanent. Still, she did. The first page was her name. Full name. Date of birth. Next came a grainy photo of her brother standing outside a mechanic shop in Lagos, grease on his hands, smiling at something beyond the frame. Her chest tightened. Emeka needs surgery, Zhang said quietly. Spinal. The kind insurance delays until the pain becomes unbearable. Your transfers help. They are just never enough. Her vision blurred. Leave him out of this, she whispered. I already know him, Zhang replied. I also know your rent is late. Again. And that your manager wrote you up twice. Once for serving a VIP without authorization, once for being in a restricted hallway after hours. She flinched. Those violations had followed her like shadows. Warnings that one more mistake would be the last. You were unlucky, Zhang said. Wrong hallway, wrong night. He leaned back, folding his hands. You have 24 hours. Tomorrow night, the Chandelier will be busy. Private bookings, people who think dim light hides everything. One of your patrons is not who he claims to be. He is watching my money, my people, my roots. I want his name. I don't know how, she said, the words spilling out too fast. I'm just a waitress. Zhang smiled, not kindly. You are observant. You notice who asks the wrong questions, who doesn't drink what they order, who listens more than they talk. You will figure it out. And if I don't? Her voice cracked. He stood. Men behind him rose in perfect silence. Then you will not come to work the next night, Zhang said, and no one will look for you. The drive back felt unreal. Streetlights streaked past her window, bright and meaningless. Her body moved on instinct, unlocking doors, climbing stairs, dropping her keys onto the small table by the door. The apartment smelled faintly of detergent and old takeout. Safe smells, normal smells. She slid down the wall and sat on the floor, knees pulled to her chest. Her phone buzzed with a message from her brother, a short voice note. He tried to sound strong. He always did. She didn't play it. She couldn't. She thought of the river, how Jang had said it without raising his voice as if it were a scheduling detail. She thought of the folder, the neatness of it all. No threats scribbled in red, no shouting, just facts laid out like receipts. She paced the apartment, counting steps without realizing it. The window showed the city spread out and alive, people laughing somewhere below, cars honking in irritation, music thumping from a neighboring building. Life going on, careless and loud. Who could she call? Her manager would laugh, then fire her. The police would ask questions she couldn't answer without sounding insane. Friends had drifted away when money got tight and shifts got longer. She scrolled through her contacts anyway, thumb hovering, then lowered the phone. She was alone. That truth settled heavier than fear. Sleep did not come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Zhang's calm expression, heard the soft slide of the folder across the table. By morning, her reflection looked older, the skin beneath her eyes darkened by worry she could not wash away. At the club that night, everything felt sharper. Laughter rang louder, glassware clinked like warnings. She tied her apron with steady hands and forced her shoulders back. If this was the bargain, she would survive it one shift at a time. She watched. She listened. A man who ordered club soda but never touched it. Another who smiled too easily, asked about security cameras as if making conversation. A woman who scanned exits before sitting down. Her pulse quickened with every detail. By the end of the night, her feet ached and her mind burned. She did not yet know the name, but she knew one thing with cold certainty. Jang Kim had not chosen her at random. He had chosen her because desperation sharpens attention, because fear keeps secrets, and because some bargains, once accepted, do not end when the task is done. They only tighten. Ifeoma returned to work 2 nights later, wearing the same pressed uniform, the same neutral face, and the same careful walk she had practiced since her first day at the club. On the surface, nothing had changed. The music still hummed low beneath conversation, glasses still clinked with a soft, expensive sound, and men with polished shoes still moved through the room as if the world bent slightly in their favor. Yet everything felt different. She felt it the moment she stepped inside. Mr. Delacroix looked at her longer than usual. Not openly, not in a way anyone else would notice, but long enough for her to feel it settle in her chest. His eyes followed her as she crossed the floor, as though he were measuring something new or confirming something old. He said nothing, only gave a brief nod before turning away. That silence felt heavier than a warning. Jang Kim's instructions played on repeat in her head. Simple words, cold words. Observe, listen, report. Nothing else. No heroics, no hesitation. The burner phone sat hidden in the inner pocket of her bag, its weight pressing against her side like a reminder she couldn't set down. He had handed it to her without ceremony, without explanation beyond the basics. 1 number saved. No names, no questions. When she asked what would happen if she refused, he had only smiled and said nothing at all. The private party began late, the kind reserved for people who disliked being seen but loved being served. The VIP section closed off quietly, curtains drawn, security posted with practiced ease. Ifeoma moved through the room with steady hands, refilling glasses, clearing plates, letting her presence fade the way she had learned to do long before this job. People spoke more freely when they forgot you were listening. She listened. At first, it was all the usual talk, money shifting from one place to another, tech deals spoken of vaguely, as if clarity itself were dangerous. Then she noticed him. He didn't match the others. Not quite. He wore confidence, but it sat too carefully on his shoulders. His suit was expensive but chosen for effect rather than habit. He asked questions that circled rather than landed. "San Francisco," he said, when someone asked where he was based. "Venture capital, emerging markets, growth opportunities." He smiled easily, but his eyes stayed alert, scanning the room even while he laughed. Ifeoma watched from a distance, then closer, pretending to wipe a table that didn't need cleaning. He spoke into his phone once, turning slightly away, his voice lowered just enough. She caught fragments, timelines, movement, pressure from above. Not the language of an investor. The rhythm was wrong. Her stomach tightened. This was the man. She felt no satisfaction in the realization, only a slow, sinking understanding. Jung Kim had been right. He was hiding in plain sight, wearing wealth like a costume, and she was the one who had been chosen to see him. Her hands shook as she stepped into the service corridor and pulled out the burner phone. For a moment she stared at it, remembering how her life had looked just days earlier. Paychecks counted carefully, dreams kept small on purpose, the quiet belief that if she stayed invisible, she would stay safe. She typed the message with shaking thumbs. Description: name he had let slip, where he was sitting, what he was pretending to be. Send. The reply came almost immediately. 2 words, received, nothing more. The rest of the night passed in a blur. She served, smiled, nodded, and did not look at the man again. She didn't need to. The choice had already been made. Not by him, not by her, by the system she had just stepped into. 2 days later, the club buzzed with a different kind of gossip. Quiet, cautious. People spoke in half sentences. The man from San Francisco was gone. Reassigned, someone said. Alaska, another whispered, as if the word itself carried punishment. No explanation, no farewell, just absence. Ifeoma stood near the bar when she heard it, her fingers tightening around a glass she wasn't even holding. Alaska. She had never been there, but she knew what reassignment meant in that world. It meant removal, isolation, silence. Careers didn't recover from moves like that. Lives didn't always either. That night, Jang Kim sent a single message to the burner phone. Good work. She stared at the screen long after it went dark. The weight of what she had done settled slowly, then all at once. She hadn't pulled a trigger. She hadn't signed a document. She hadn't raised her voice. And yet, she had ended something. A path. A future. Maybe more. The thought made her chest ache. She washed her hands longer than necessary in the staff bathroom, watching the water run over her skin as if it could carry the feeling away. It didn't. When she looked up, her reflection seemed unfamiliar. Older. Sharper. Someone who had crossed a line and couldn't remember how it looked from the other side. There was no celebration, no rush. Only a quiet understanding that the world she was in now operated on different rules. Actions didn't need noise to cause damage. Silence was enough. As she left the club that night, the city air felt colder. The burner phone pressed against her side again, no longer just an object, but a door she had walked through. She understood then that this had not been a test. It had been an introduction. And whatever came next, there would be no pretending she was only a waitress anymore. By daylight, Ifeoma learned how to fold herself into a version that caused no trouble. She moved through the private club with a tray balanced on her palm, shoulders back. Smile ready before anyone asked for it. Champagne flutes chimed, laughter rose and fell, Men in tailored jackets spoke too loudly about deals that were never written down, their confidence filling the room like smoke. She learned which tables liked to be seen and which preferred shadows. She learned who snapped their fingers, who leaned too close, who mistook a waitress's patience for permission. Some nights the comments came wrapped in jokes. Other nights they arrived blunt and careless, hands brushing her waist as she passed, eyes that lingered too long. She swallowed her reactions, the same way she had learned to swallow fear back home when money ran thin. Rent still needed to be paid. Her brother still needed help. So she smiled, apologized for things that were not her fault, and kept moving. What no one noticed was how carefully she listened. She remembered names without writing them down. She noticed who paid in cash and who never did. She watched which men arrived alone and left with company that was never introduced. The club thought it owned her hours. It did not know it was teaching her its secrets for free. Night turned her into someone else. She would leave through the staff exit, heels in hand, uniform folded into her bag. In parking garages that smelled of oil and damp concrete, she waited with her heart pounding, the sound of passing cars echoing above. In empty warehouses with flickering lights and doors that never fully closed, she spoke quietly while Jang Kim listened. He never rushed her. That was the part that unsettled her most. Jang Kim stood apart from his men, hands in his coat pockets, expression calm in a way that felt practiced over decades. When she spoke, he looked directly at her, as if her words were already expected. She told him about a tech investor who used the club as a meeting ground to shuffle funds through shell accounts. About a married couple who fought in whispers over a trading scheme that leaned on information stolen weeks before public announcements. About a senator's donor who drank too much and talked about debts he could not explain. Jang Kim nodded once, sometimes twice. Occasionally he asked a single question, precise and cold. She answered honestly because guessing felt more dangerous than silence. Payment came in envelopes, always sealed, always heavier than she expected. The first time she counted the bills alone in her apartment, sitting on the floor with her back against the couch. Her hands shook. It was more money than she had ever held at once. Relief flooded her so fast it almost hurt. Then fear followed close behind. Money changed things. It softened worries, then sharpened others. She paid overdue bills, fixed the broken lock on her door, bought groceries without calculating each item. Still, she could feel the weight of it around her neck. Jang Kim never said she owed him. He never needed to. The envelopes kept coming because she kept talking. The silence between those two facts felt tight and unbreakable. At the club, she grew sharper. She learned when to refill a glass just to stay close enough to hear a sentence finish. She learned how to appear invisible while standing 3 feet away. Some nights, she caught her reflection in mirrored walls and barely recognized the woman looking back. Her smile came too easily now. Her eyes measured exits without her thinking about it. When the harassment grew heavier, she told herself it was temporary. When a man squeezed her wrist hard enough to leave marks, she laughed it off in front of witnesses and cried later in the bathroom stall. She washed her face, reapplied lipstick, and returned to the floor. Quitting would have been safer. Staying felt necessary. She called her brother every Sunday. She told him the club had noticed her work. She said she had been trusted with more responsibility. She let the word promotion sit between them, warm and believable. He sounded proud, the way he used to when she came home with good grades. She sent money regularly, more than she ever had before. He asked if she was okay. She said yes without hesitation. Lying came easier when the truth felt too heavy to hand over. Sometimes after meetings with Jang Kim, she sat in her car with the engine off, listening to her own breathing. She imagined what would happen if she stopped answering messages, if she disappeared into another city, another job. The thought never lasted. She had seen too much. She had said too much. Jong Kim had paid her too well. He never threatened her. That was his power. Once, as she handed him information about a banker who liked to gamble more than he could afford, Jong Kim studied her for a long moment. "You're careful," he said. It was not praise. It was observation. "I have to be," she replied. He gave a small nod, as if confirming something to himself. The club continued to glow at night, music spilling onto the street as luxury cars lined the curb. Inside, deals were made between sips and smiles, and Ifeoma moved among them like a ghost with a tray. Outside, in places where light struggled to survive, she fed a machine that grew stronger with every name she offered. By the time she lay in bed each night, sleep came late. Her phone stayed face down on the table. Every vibration tightened her chest. She told herself she was doing this for family, for survival, for a way out that would come if she just endured a little longer. Deep down, she understood the truth she never spoke aloud. The money had opened doors, yes, but it had also closed others. And each step she took between those two worlds pulled her further from the girl who once believed hard work alone could keep her safe. The question slipped out of her before she could soften it. They were alone again, seated across from each other in the quiet room that never seemed to belong to any hour of the day. No guards in sight, no raised voices, just the low hum of the building settling around them. Ifeoma's hands were steady on her lap, though her chest felt tight. "Why didn't you just kill me?" Jang Kim did not look up right away. He was studying the table between them, the faint scratch in the wood that Ifeoma had noticed during their first meeting. She had learned that silence with him was never empty. It carried weight. It waited for people to expose themselves. For a long moment she thought he would ignore the question, let it hang there as punishment for her boldness. That was how men like him usually worked. They reminded you that curiosity had a price. Instead, he leaned back slowly and exhaled, a sound closer to fatigue than irritation. "You assume there was a simple answer," he said at last. She met his eyes. "With men like you, there usually is." A faint smile crossed his face, but it did not reach his eyes. It was the kind of expression that warned people they were standing near a ledge. "There was a time," he said, "when I believed that too." He stood and walked toward the narrow window, his back to her. The city lights below barely reached them, leaving his outline half swallowed by shadow. "I grew up in Seoul," he began, his voice calm, almost distant. "Not the part people like to imagine. Not neon signs and clean streets. Ours was quieter, older, the kind of place where secrets lived longer than people." Ifeoma listened without interrupting. Something in his tone told her that if she broke the silence, the story would end. "I had an older sister," he continued. "She was smart, too smart for our neighborhood. She noticed things adults pretended not to see." His fingers curled slightly against the window frame. "One night, she saw something she wasn't meant to. Men meeting, money changing hands, names that were never spoken aloud. She thought telling the truth would protect us." He paused, and this time the silence felt heavier, thicker. "They made me watch," he said quietly. "They said it was better that way, that fear teaches faster than words." Ifeoma's breath caught before she could stop it. "I was young," Jang Kim went on. "Young enough to believe that if I didn't cry, if I didn't move, maybe they would stop. They didn't." He turned back to face her then. The man standing before her was still dangerous, still controlled, but something had shifted. His eyes were sharper now, like a door cracked open and slammed shut too many times. "When it was over," he said, "I understood something very clearly. Power decides who lives. Power decides whose silence matters, and I swore I would never be the boy in the corner again." The room felt smaller. Ifeoma realized she had leaned forward without noticing, her body pulled toward the truth he had laid bare. "So, you became them," she said softly. "No," he replied, shaking his head. "I became worse. I became prepared." The words sent a chill through her. He studied her face then, really studied it, as if searching for something he refused to name. "You walked into a place you weren't meant to be," he said. "You saw what others died for seeing, and yet you stood there. You didn't scream. You didn't beg." Her throat tightened. She remembered that moment too clearly. The cold floor, the weight of every eye on her, the certainty that her life had already ended. "My sister looked at me the same way," he added, as if she was already gone, but still hoping someone would remember her. The admission landed between them like a blade. Ifeoma felt it then. Not mercy, not protection, recognition. "You see her in me," she said. His jaw tightened. "Don't flatter yourself." But he did not deny it. The realization did not bring comfort. It made her pulse quicken with fear. "Does that mean I'm safe?" she asked. Jang Kim's expression hardened. "No," he said flatly. "It means you are dangerous." She frowned. "To you?" "To myself," he corrected. "Because hesitation is weakness. Memory is weakness. And you bring both into the room." He stepped closer, his presence pressing in on her space without touching her. "I did not kill you because I wanted to understand why I hesitated," he said. "That makes you unpredictable, and people like me do not tolerate unpredictability for long." Ifeoma swallowed. "So what happens now?" His gaze lingered on her, measuring, calculating. "Now," he said, "you learn something most people never do." "And what is that?" "That monsters don't soften," Jang Kim replied. "They adapt." As he turned away, Ifeoma understood the truth that settled cold in her chest. This knowledge did not make him human in a way that saved her. It made him human in a way that made every decision sharper, every outcome less certain. She had not found a crack in his armor. She had found the blade hidden inside it. The trouble does not announce itself loudly at first. It slips in the way smoke does, thin, patient, easy to miss if you are not already watching the edges of the room. Ifeoma feels it during a slow hour at the Chandelier Club, when the music hums low and the glasses shine too clean. New faces linger longer than they should. Men who do not drink much, who scan exits instead of dancers. They are polite, almost forgettable, which makes them dangerous. She hears the name Park before she understands what it means. It happens near the service corridor, the narrow stretch that smells of citrus cleaner and old wood. Ifeoma is returning empty trays when two men step into the shadow beside the freezer door. They speak Korean, careless enough to assume she is invisible, or ignorant enough not to matter. She keeps her head down, fingers tight around the tray, breath shallow. Years of learning when to listen and when to disappear serve her well. They talk about docs, about a delivery that requires no paperwork and no mistakes, about timing, and how Jang Kim has grown too comfortable behind chandeliers and velvet ropes. One of them laughs and calls it a gift, something special meant to remind him who truly controls the city's veins. Ifeoma does not move until their footsteps fade. Her heart pounds so hard she worries it might echo down the hall. She finishes her shift with steady hands she does not feel, smiling when required, counting minutes until she can find Jang Kim. When she finally speaks to him, it is not dramatic. She tells him what she heard in plain words, the way she has learned he prefers. No fear, no opinions, just facts. His face does not change. He listens as if she is reciting inventory. When she finishes, he nods once, That is all. 2 nights later, the city breathes heavier near the water. Jang Kim's men move before dawn, quiet and precise. Ifeoma learns later how the shipment is intercepted, how the crates are opened to reveal white powder wrapped like promise and death. Money is counted. Decisions are made. The Park Syndicate loses something they cannot afford to lose, and they do not forgive easily. The retaliation comes fast. The club is alive that night, loud and careless in the way people get when they believe walls can protect them. Ifeoma steps outside through the service entrance to dump trash, grateful for the cool air against her skin. She hears the sound first, not the sharp crack she expects, but something flatter, muffled by distance and disbelief. Then she sees Jang Kim. He is crossing toward his car, coat open, mid-conversation. The first shot knocks him sideways. The second sends glass shattering. People scream. Someone drops to the ground. Ifeoma freezes, her back pressed to the brick, eyes wide, unable to look away. She watches his men react, bodies forming a shield, guns drawn, shouting orders that blur into noise. Jang Kim does not fall. Blood darkens his shirt, spreading slow and real. He grimaces, more annoyed than afraid, and is dragged behind cover. The shooter runs. He does not get far. They catch him near the alley, beneath a flickering light that makes everything look unreal, like a stage set gone wrong. Ifeoma should run. Every part of her knows she should turn away, go back inside, pretend she heard nothing. But her legs refuse. She watches as they force the man to his knees. Jang Kim appears moments later, pale but upright, one hand pressed to his side. His eyes find Ifeoma where she stands half hidden in the doorway. For a second, something unreadable passes between them. Then he looks back at the man kneeling in the dirt. There is no speech, no anger spilled into the air. Jang Kim takes the gun from one of his men, checks it with calm precision, and fires. The sound is louder this time. Final. Ifeoma flinches, the noise slamming into her chest. She tastes metal in her mouth. The man crumples forward, and the alley goes quiet in a way that feels wrong, like the city itself is holding its breath. Jang Kim hands the gun back, already turning away. Blood drips from his fingers. He does not look at the body again. As he passes Ifeoma, he stops just long enough to speak. "You did well," he says, voice steady, almost gentle. "You listened." Then he walks past her and disappears into the night, leaving her with the weight of what she has seen. Later, when the club returns to its rhythm and the story becomes something whispered and reshaped, Ifeoma scrubs her hands in the sink until her skin burns. She understands now that there is no edge she can stand on safely. She has crossed something invisible, something that does not allow return. The Park Syndicate has made their move. Jang Kim has answered. And she has seen the cost with her own eyes. Sleep does not come easily after that. When it does, it brings sound instead of rest. The echo of a gunshot. The look in Jang Kim's eyes. Calm, certain, unforgiving. She knows then that survival will not be enough anymore. Listening will no longer be a choice. The message arrived just before dawn when the city was quiet enough to make every sound feel louder than it should. Ifeoma's phone buzzed once on the nightstand. She ignored it at first, half awake, mind still fogged with the weight of the last few days. When it buzzed again, she reached for it, expecting another missed call from a blocked number, another empty threat she could push aside until daylight. The video began without a greeting. Chukwu sat on a bare concrete floor, his hands tied behind his back with rough cord that bit into his wrists. A strip of cloth was pulled tight across his mouth. His eyes, eyes she had known since childhood, eyes that used to light up when she brought him sweets after work, were wide and frantic. He tried to speak, failed, and shook his head as if to say her name without sound. Ifeoma's knees gave way. She slid down against the wall, the phone slipping from her fingers and clattering onto the floor. She crawled toward it, heart hammering so hard she thought it might tear her open. The video paused on Chukwu's face. A message followed, plain and clean, almost polite. "Give us Jong Kim's location. 72 hours. No signatures, no insults, just certainty." She screamed then, once, sharp and raw, before clamping her hand over her mouth. Her chest hurt. Her thoughts scattered. Lagos rushed into her mind in broken pieces. The dormitory gates, the smell of fried plantain near the campus, the way Chukwu laughed too loudly when he was nervous. He was only 19. He had stayed out of trouble. He had trusted that being careful was enough. She tried to call him. The line went dead every time. By the time the sun rose, she had cried herself empty. There was nothing left inside her but fear and a cold, trembling resolve. She knew who had done this. The park syndicate did not bluff, and they did not forgive. She also knew what they wanted, and the price of giving it. Jong Kim's name sat heavy in her chest as she made her way to him. She expected guards to turn her away, or worse, laughter at her expense. She expected indifference. Men like him did not rescue brothers out of kindness. She went anyway, because there was nowhere else to go. When she was brought into the room, Jong Kim looked exactly as he always did, calm, measured, hands steady as he poured tea. He did not ask why she had come. He waited. She broke in front of him. The words spilled out in a rush, tangled and desperate. She showed him the video. She did not hide the way her hands shook. When she finished, she stood there, hollowed out, ready for rejection. Jong Kim watched the screen without changing his expression. When it ended, he set the phone down carefully, as if it were something fragile. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence pressed in on her ears. "I don't leave debts unpaid," he said at last. The words were not comforting, but they were not cruel either. He rose from his seat and walked to the window, speaking as if he were discussing weather, not a life measured in hours. He spoke of contacts in ports and cities she had never seen, of men who owed him favors they wished they could forget. Phones rang, orders were given, names moved across the room like pieces on a board. Hope flared in her chest, painful and bright. It almost knocked the breath out of her. Then he turned back to her. "This will not be charity," he said. "I will find your brother, but you will help me end Park's leadership here. You know their roots, their habits. You've already hurt them once." Her stomach dropped, the hope twisted into something sharper. "If you refuse," he continued, voice even, "I stop searching, and the clock keeps running." She wanted to shout. She wanted to beg him to see Chukwu as more than leverage. Instead, she heard herself asking how long it would take to locate him. "Soon," Jong Kim replied. "Soon enough to matter." She nodded, because there was no other answer left to give. That night, she sat alone and watched the video again. She noticed details she had missed before. The flicker of fluorescent light, the damp patch on the floor, the faint hum of a generator. She memorized Chukwu's breathing, counted the seconds between his blinks. She whispered apologies to a screen that could not hear her. She thought about the line she had crossed when she intercepted the shipment, how she had believed she could walk away afterward. She thought about the quiet pride in her brother's voice the last time they spoke, how he had told her he was doing fine, that she did not need to worry so much. By morning, fear had hardened into something colder. If this was the cost of keeping him alive, she would pay it. She would stand beside Jong Kim and finish what she had started, even if it burned whatever part of her was left untouched. 72 hours was no longer a number. It was a pulse. A countdown she felt in her bones as the world narrowed to one goal: bring Chukwu home, or lose him forever. The night felt wrong from the moment Ifeoma stepped back into the Chandelier Club with a purpose she never imagined for herself. The music still hummed through the walls upstairs, polished laughter spilling from velvet booths, but beneath it all ran a colder current. She had walked these halls countless times with a tray in her hand and a practiced smile on her face. Tonight, her steps were slower, measured, every breath reminding her that this building now held a secret that could bury her alive. Minjun Park arrived exactly as promised. He wore confidence the way other men wore coats, casually as though nothing in the world could reach his skin. He followed her toward the private elevator without suspicion, his guards trailing behind, their eyes scanning mirrors and shadows. Ifeoma kept her face neutral, repeating the words Jung Kim had drilled into her earlier: calm voice, no hesitation, no sudden movement. She told Minjun that Jung Kim was ready to end the war, that desperation had finally cracked him, that surrender could be negotiated quietly, away from cameras and witnesses. Minjun smiled, as if he had already won. The elevator descended into the underground garage, the doors opening to a space that smelled of oil and cold concrete. The lights flickered slightly, just enough to unsettle without giving anything away. As Minjun stepped forward, Ifeoma felt the moment stretch thin. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She turned back, just as planned, giving the signal with a simple nod. The world shattered into noise. Gunfire exploded from both sides of the garage, sharp and deafening. Screams echoed as Park's men reached for their weapons, but Jung Kim's shooters were already in position. Cars became shields, bullets tearing through glass and metal. Ifeoma dropped instinctively, crawling behind a pillar as sparks flew inches from her face. The polished fantasy of the club above felt impossibly distant now. This was not strategy or words. This was survival. Through the chaos, she saw Jung Kim emerge from behind a black SUV, barking orders with brutal clarity. For a moment, he looked untouchable, until he wasn't. A single shot caught him high in the side, the impact knocking him backward. He hit the ground hard, blood darkening his suit almost instantly. Ifeoma froze. This was her chance. The gunfire had created an opening near the ramp. She could run. She could disappear into the night and never look back. No one would blame her. No one would even look for her. Her body leaned toward escape before her mind could catch up. Then Jung Kim met her eyes. There was no plea in his stare, no command. Just pain, shock, and something else she hadn't expected. Trust. Against every instinct she had left, Ifeoma turned back. She sprinted through the smoke, bullets slamming into the concrete around her. Her shoulder clipped a car door, sending a sharp pain down her arm, but she kept moving. She dropped beside Jung Kim, gripping his jacket and dragging him toward cover behind a thick support beam. He groaned, his breathing shallow, blood soaking her hands. "Stay down!" she shouted, though she wasn't sure who she was talking to anymore. Her hands shook as she pressed against the wound, tearing fabric to apply pressure the way she'd once learned in a first aid class she never thought would matter. Jung Kim clenched his teeth, his fingers digging into her sleeve as another wave of gunfire erupted. The sound was overwhelming, metal screaming, engines dying, men yelling in languages she barely understood. Time lost its shape. There was only the weight of his body, the warmth of his blood, the steady pressure she forced herself to maintain. Each second felt borrowed. She expected fear to break her open, but instead, something steadier took hold. Focus. Resolve. If she let go now, everything she had already done would mean nothing. Gradually, the shooting thinned. One by one, the echoes faded, replaced by labored breathing and the distant wail of alarms above. Jang Kim's men moved through the garage with ruthless efficiency, confirming what was already clear. The Park Syndicate had walked into a slaughter. When it was over, the silence felt heavier than the noise had been. Jang Kim lay back against the pillar, pale but alive. His men secured the perimeter, some injured, some dead, all marked by the cost of what had just unfolded. Victory, if it could be called that, carried a bitter weight. The floor was slick with blood, the air thick with smoke and loss. An ambulance was called, not a public one. As they lifted Jang Kim onto a stretcher, his hand caught Ifeoma's wrist. His grip was weak, but deliberate. "You chose," he said quietly. She nodded, unable to find words that felt honest enough. As they wheeled him away, Ifeoma stayed behind for a moment, leaning against the cold concrete, her clothes stained, her hands still trembling. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. There would be no returning to the woman who once worried about spilled drinks and late tips. Blood had been shed, and some of it was now on her hands. Above them, the Chandelier Club would open again in a few hours, lights restored, music playing as if nothing had happened. But beneath it, something had shifted. And Ifeoma knew, with a clarity that frightened her, that this night had bound her fate to Jang Kim's, whether she was ready for it or not. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain-soaked concrete, the kind of sterile quiet that presses against the ears. Machines whispered beside Jang Kim's bed, their steady rhythm proof that he had not slipped away. Ifeoma stood near the window with her arms folded, watching the city lights blur through glass she had no interest in touching. She had imagined this moment differently. She had imagined relief arriving all at once, a clean break between terror and safety. Instead, the feeling never came. Jang Kim's eyes opened slowly. He looked thinner, drained, but the weight in his gaze had not lifted. Power still sat there, calm and alert, like a blade laid flat on a table. He studied her without urgency, then spoke as though continuing a conversation they had paused minutes ago. "Your brother is safe." The words landed gently, almost kindly. He told her how Chukwu had been pulled from a holding house outside the city, shaken but unharmed. No ransom call, no bargaining. By the time Ifeoma had been pacing hospital hallways, her brother had already been placed on a flight. London. A respected university, tuition covered, housing arranged. The funds traced back to a company that did not exist in any meaningful way. She nodded as he spoke, her body reacting properly even as something inside her stayed distant. She thanked him. She meant it. But gratitude felt thin, stretched too far. She had paid for this outcome in ways that could not be returned or erased. Chukwu's safety did not undo the nights she no longer slept through, the memories that surfaced without warning, the knowledge now stitched into her bones. "You did well," Jang Kim said, his voice low. "You adapted." That word made her flinch. Adapted sounded like growth. Progress. What she felt was corrosion. He waited, letting the machines fill the space between them. Then he told her what came next. Not as a threat, not as a plea, simply as fact. She could stay, not as a frightened bystander, not as a woman hoping to be overlooked, but as someone under his protection. There would be structure, compensation, security that most people never touched. She would not need to worry about doors left unlocked or unfamiliar footsteps behind her. Her life would be arranged, insulated, controlled, or she could leave. He did not dress up the second option. People who walked away did not live in peace. They lived quietly, nervously, always measuring what they said and where they went. They aged early. They trusted no one. Knowing what she knew meant she would never again be ordinary. Ifeoma looked at him then, really looked. He was offering her the same mercy he offered himself, survival with conditions. She did not ask for time. "Yes," she said. The word surprised her with how easily it came. No shaking, no tears, just acceptance. The choice had been made long before it was spoken aloud, perhaps the first night she realized no one was coming to rescue her. She resigned from the Chandelier Club a week later. No raised voices, no accusations. She handed in her uniform and walked out through the front entrance in daylight, her name cleared, her departure framed as opportunity rather than escape. The staff smiled at her with envy, unaware that she had not climbed upward so much as stepped sideways into shadow. The days that followed blurred into meetings, briefings, quiet instructions delivered without emotion. She learned how silence worked as currency, how loyalty was measured, how rules shifted depending on who stood in the room. No one touched her. No one threatened her. That, she realized, was the privilege. The penthouse dinner happened without ceremony. No entourage, no guards hovering in plain sight. Just two plates set far apart on a long table, city lights stretching below like something distant and unreal. Jang Kim ate slowly, favoring his injured side. Ifeoma noticed everything without commenting. She had learned when observation was safer than concern. They spoke of small things, the food, a news story playing on mute, the weather changing. Between sentences, something settled into place. Not comfort, not trust, recognition. They were bound now, not by affection, but by shared survival, by choices made under pressure and paths that no longer ran straight. She understood then that some rescues come with invisible chains, and some debts do not ask to be paid back. They simply remain. When dinner ended, neither rushed to leave the table. Outside, the city continued as it always had, unaware of the quiet agreement that had just sealed itself above it. Thank you for sticking around with me. My wonderful story family. If that final moment made your pulse spike, don't look away now. This story isn't over unless you decide it is. Subscribe now and hit like button if you caught yourself wondering what you would have chosen in her place. Subscribe if you want front row access to what comes next, because the next chapter cuts deeper, hits harder, and leaves no one safe. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. Stay sharp, stay close. See you in the next one.